Hello everyone and welcome to All Things Watched. In this video we are going to talk about episode 2 of the brand new Phase 5 MCU project simply titled Echo. And Echo is the very first project under the Marvel Cinematic's newest banner, which is titled Spotlight. So this is actually the very first Spotlight project, and so far, honestly, I think considering that this is the very first project under Spotlight, I think that they're actually doing a pretty good job, and it gives me a lot of hope for the upcoming Daredevil Born Again. It also gives me a little hope for the Punisher and all of the other Netflix defenders once they return. And so, I'm not oblivious to some of the pacing issues and some of the issues of this series as a whole, but I do think that this was a great first project and a great first chapter into the Marvel's Spotlight banner. And so episode 2 is titled Lowak, and if you're interested in watching along with me, you can do so over on our Patreon account. But with that being said, let's just go right ahead and jump in. This episode begins in 1200 AD Alabama, and of course the reason why this episode is titled Lowak, because we're introduced to this really strong, cool, independent, ferocious character who's actually known as Lowak, and Lowak is one of the ancestors in Echo's lineage. She is one of the people that is a part of that bloodline and a part of that indigenous culture, and she also and she, as we learn here watching this episode and watching this opening sequence, she actually ends up being able to tap into the power of Chaffa, which Echo also does in this episode as well. But as you can see here, it looks like they're playing sort of this indigenous native version of lacrosse. At least that's what it put me in mind of. I'm probably wrong. There probably is a real name for it, but to me, I just looked at this and the first thing that came to my mind was lacrosse. And so this game that they're playing is for high stakes, and the losing tribe, will end up being banished from this, from from the community and whatnot. And so, as you can see, there be a ton of struggle. Lowak's team and the other team, the opposing team, end up getting tied, and Lowak is actually doing a really good job. But then she ends up getting surrounded by almost like this mosh pit, or almost like all the opponents, and they're all fighting to get the ball, and she is actually about to lose, which would essentially make her tribe end up being banished from the nation, or from the community. But she ends up getting a flashback back to Chaffa, and of course, as soon as we see Chaffa and she gets the flashback, then it seems to me like Chaffa's abilities and powers ends up manifesting in Lowak. And as you can see, when she looks down at her hand ends up glowing, which also happens to Echo or Mya later on in the episode. But as you can see, she gets the visions from Chaffa. Her hand ends up glowing, giving her sort of like this supernatural ability, and she ends up being able to escape, and she ends up actually winning the game, and her tribe is no longer her tribe is saved, and they don't need to be banished. And so I would just assume that the losing tribe would end up being banished from the community, and that's basically how this episode opens. I was actually a big fan with how each episode of Echo sort of picks up with a certain lineage of her ancestral bloodline. I really like how the first one showed the origins of the Chata Nation, which was Chaffa. This one starts with Lowak, which is obviously much further ahead in time. This is 1200 AD, so is when you really think about it, it's not too long ago. It's only roughly 1,000 years ago. Actually, less than 1,000 years ago, really. And then when we get to episode 3, I think that one, it starts to take place in the 1800s, like the late 1800s. So we have some really big, time jumps with each of these, with each of these ancestors. I just really appreciated the fact that each episode opens with a different ancestor, showing us the history and also the lineage leading up to Mya herself. And so I put this screenshot here, Echo, just for the sake of, this is the very first time that we actually get an opening sequence. And I think they do play the opening sequence at the very end of episode 1, like just as the credits come. But here in this episode, they actually open the episode with the really cool opening sequence. And I really loved the song, and I really loved the design and the basically the opening sequence itself. Like it had very much like almost like a James Bond kind of opening, almost like James Bond meets or some sort of almost like James Bond meets almost like a I don't even know really what to, what to compare it to, but you know what I mean. It has this very action sequence, very James Bond, almost spy agent type feeling to it, and I just really enjoyed it, which is kind of ironic because later in the episode we do see Echo sort of wearing this sort of tactical gear and whatnot. So I just wanted to mention the opening because I think it's one of the best openings that Marvel's actually ever done yet for any movie or any TV series, because even the music, the score, it just suits the mood so much, and the music itself almost becomes a character, and I really felt like the music was really able to really able to push that sequence, especially with the person who's singing the voice. It just sounded so good. And so we end up then finally getting into the episode in modern day, present day. We go back to Echo, or Mya, really. I guess she's technically not really considered Echo yet. This is an Echo origin story. And so she ends up meeting up with Biscuit. Biscuit ends up coming and bringing her a whole bunch of supplies. And she ends up noticing that he's driving a truck. And she actually asks Biscuits if this truck is able to go four-wheeling, if she's able to go off-roading, if the truck is good with four-wheel drive and whatnot. Obviously, he doesn't know why, but he basically tells her the truck is probably capable, but he can't do it because if he does, Grandma will kill him because he'll get in a lot of trouble. So that was just a really funny back and forth, a really funny banter between him and Mya. But it also shows the relationship that Mya has with Biscuits. She does obviously trust him. She obviously likes him. But we do learn later on that her grandmother ends up actually telling Biscuits that, or ends up telling Henry, sorry, that it seems like sometimes Biscuits might be easily manipulated, so to speak. And so maybe Mya knows this and is actually taking advantage of it. I'm not sure. But either way, it's a pretty funny sequence. You can see how she's sort of leading him into allowing her to use or borrow this truck in some weird way, shape, or form. And so once he ends up giving her the supplies that I guess she had ordered, she ends up giving him more money and gives him a list this time of a whole different list of items that she needs, because she is about to go on a really cool basically mission. Like I said, it's the way they execute it in this episode is almost like she's this tactical, almost like special ops type person. I would say that she's almost like kind of like a Black Widow, or maybe even a White Widow, because White Widow is probably more in line with Echo, where Echo is not really a hero, she's more of a villain, and so I would say she's probably more like White Widow, willing to do whatever it takes. And so he agrees, and I really thought it was funny too when he takes the money. He actually asks her, is this legal? And she never really answers him. She just gives him the bunch of money. He takes it and goes on. And so we end up getting this hilarious scene here where we have these two white folks into Scully's pawn shop, and they're trying to debate whether or not to buy these certain items, and they sort of end up coming to the conclusion that they don't want to buy the items. But we have a really funny sequence there with Scully. He's like banging the table, with this ancient relic or whatever it is that he has there, and he's like hitting the table, and he's like, buy the damn thing, buy the damn thing. It's just so funny. And but Biscuits ends up basically getting the sale for him by basically calling out the other shops and what for not being authentic. And he tells these two folks that if they buy here at this pawn shop from Scully, they should be very they should know that they're going to be getting something authentic. And so he ends up getting Scully the sale, and then he ends up giving Scully the list, and he ends up looking for a specific camera. And Scully gives him a bunch of different cameras, but of course they're all kind of really big. And so Biscuits ends up finding a specific camera, and Scully is like, I have way better quality cameras than this one, the one that Biscuit had. And Biscuit says, well, I'm not looking for something better, I'm looking for something smaller, like the size of a hummingbird's tongue. And so Scully ends up pulling out this, basically what looks like this special ops kind of tactical camera, and gives it to him. Now, at first, when I first seen this, first seen this scene, I'm after watching Echo now, and while I'm sort of watching through it as we do these reviews again, but this is my third time watching through it now, and whatnot, so the first time I seen this, I was kind of like, I just didn't really buy into it. I was like, I don't think that Scully would really have that kind of equipment here. But then I thought about it, and I was like, well, this is the United States, and they do have, the right to bear arms and whatnot. So then I just sort of started to think, well, maybe he would have access to some of this tactical gear a little bit easier than what anyone else would, so to speak. So I kind of just looked at it as being that way. I was like, well, maybe he would have access to it just because it's probably easier to access weapons and tactical gear down in the United States than what it would be anywhere else. Say for me, I'm up here in Canada, and we don't have the right to bear arms or anything like that. So it would be much harder for someone up here to want to get a gun, probably, and tactical equipment than what it would be for someone down there. But he ends up getting the equipment and gets everything that is on Maya's list, and he ends up bringing it back to Maya. And he basically tells her, that it's time for him to go, because she tries to, convince him to, to drive her to the mission and whatnot. And he's like, well, I got to go and have supper with grandma, with of course his chola. And she basically sort of forces her way into the vehicle, and she's like, hey, you can have supper with grandma until you're 60, so to speak, sort of also implying that she might not be sticking around, because the fact that she said that, to me, sort of implies that she's probably going to be leaving again, which kind of makes sense, because it is sort of, she is kind of really just passing through this town, at least at this point, and she really has no ambitions on staying. So she forces her way into the truck, and he ends up driving her to basically this bridge, which will be overlooking a train, which is also a sequence that we already seen in the trailers. Now, in the meantime, while Biscuits is bringing Maya to the train, we get this really cool scene here between Chola and Henry, and this is where we actually learn maybe that Biscuits is a little bit easier to manipulate, a little bit easy to manipulate. He's probably a little gullible and whatnot, because Chola actually says this to Henry. And what I thought was really interesting is that she actually tells Henry that she hopes that Maya actually sticks to her plan and only passes through. Now, the reason why I thought that was interesting is because this is the first time Maya is actually in this town, and back in Oklahoma, in who knows how long, perhaps over 20 years. At least that's what Biscuit said in episode 1. He's like, you haven't changed a bit in 20 years, and whatnot. So I just thought it was really interesting that she's sort of, hoping that Maya is only passing through and don't really want Maya to stick around. But I do appreciate the fact that she did say she doesn't want Biscuits to be in trouble, so I could appreciate that, and I could understand that, that being, a pretty good reason as to why, she doesn't want Maya to be sticking around. And so we go back to Maya and Biscuits, and as you can see, Maya here is wearing this really cool tactical, almost like this tactical outfit. She got like the straps on her, which I believe is actually a harness, which she will end up like sort of rappelling down a bunch of rope. And you can also see on one side of the straps, there's like this red circle, and we'll learn later in the mission that that's actually a light, and it has like three LEDs in it with a red screen over it. And once I seen that, which we'll get to in a few minutes when she actually begins the mission, the first thing that came to my mind was something like Tom Clancy. I feel like this was almost like one of Tom Clancy's characters going on a mission, almost like a Splinter Cell type thing. So I really like how they sort of make Echo almost like this tactical, specialist, so to speak, and which also makes it really grounded, makes this series really grounded, which is something we really did need in the MCU. It's great to be watching things like Loki or the Eternals or Shang-Chi and all these really cool, fantastical type movies. Doctor Strange, Spider-Man. But I think it's time for us to get back to this ground level, more realistic stuff, and I think Echo was a great step forward for that. And so she ends up taking his phone and she puts an app on it, and I really like the editing choices here, where they actually show us the screen. And as you can see, she actually puts a GPS or some form of tracking device on herself, and basically puts it on this app or whatnot so that Biscuits can find it. And she basically tells him, hey, follow me. And that's why, which explains why earlier she asked Biscuits if the truck is able to go off-roading, if it's good for four-wheel driving and whatnot. It's because she knew that she was going to start this mission, and she just wanted to make sure that he would be able to keep up and be able to, be able to actually follow the train tracks. And so she ends up setting up the GPS, and then so the mission begins. We get a really cool sequence here of her coming down with the tactical rope, and she just basically swings right onto the top of the train. And one thing that I really liked about the writing here, I really appreciate the fact that it was not a smooth landing. Remember, Maya is someone who, has an amputated leg, and one thing this show does a really good job is that they really do a great job with showing that this is not a weakness, it's a strength. But I do think that, when you're swinging on a rope and trying to go on top of a moving train that's moving this fast, I think that it would be difficult for anybody to land that, whether you have an amputated leg or not. So I really appreciate that her landing did not go smoothly and that she actually almost falls off the train. Just little details like that really makes all the difference. And so she starts crawling along the top of the train, and then of course we have those, I don't even know what you call them, I guess signs or, train support systems or lights, whatever it is, coming at her. And so she ends up ducking down underneath one, and then we end up going into her perspective. Now that's actually probably one of my favorite things about the show, was whenever they went into Echo's perspective, which is actually one of the biggest complaints that I had about this series, was that they didn't do it enough. And even when they do go into her perspective, they never actually let it just linger. It's like they only go into her perspective for half a minute, maybe 30 or 40 seconds, and then they just go back to normal. Especially with the fighting sequences, in some of the fighting sequences in this series, I thought should have been completely told from her perspective, or done from her perspective. I think it would have been actually more effective for us to not hear it. But like I said, these are only small nitpicks. I still love the series and whatnot and all the same. And so she's still going along the top of the train, and she ends up finding the container that she's looking for, D9-X. Now, at first I was wondering, is this like a reference to the X-Men? Because you can see the X with the dash. Also D9, I wasn't sure if this had to do with the Disney presentations that they do every year or whatnot. Or, I'm sure if you really broke down this series and you really know your comic books, a lot better than me, I feel like you'll probably know what this reference is. I'm sure there's somebody somewhere who knows what D9-X is. Could this be something to do with, the Weapon X program, which we know Wolverine eventually is coming, so he would have been a part of the Weapon X and whatnot. So, like I said, I don't really know what the reference is, but I'd be willing to bet that there is some form of reference there all the same. And so we then end up, once Maya ends up finding the appropriate part of the train, the box or whatnot, the sea can, then she ends up going underneath the train, and once again, really cool tactical sort of mission. This is the one little nitpick that I would probably say about this episode, is that I kind of wish they would have shown her actually get underneath there, because it's not that I don't believe that she couldn't do it. I just feel like the absence of us not seeing her do it makes it more unbelievable, if that makes sense. I believe absolutely that she could have done it, and that she could get underneath the train and be able to hold herself up and do this cool tactical mission. I absolutely do buy that. But I just wish they had showed it, because I think showing it would have made it more believable. Even if they only showed her rappelling down on the side, even for a split second, anything at all really. It's just the fact that they didn't show it makes it a little more unbelievable. But I was able to look past it, because I do believe she could do it. I just wish they had have showed it. And so then now she turns on that cool little light that's on her straps here. As you can see, the three dots once again really put me in mind of Splinter Cell, because oftentimes Splinter Cell has a green light, which is sort of like this. So I felt very Spy, very Tom Clancy, very White Widow type stuff here. And it was just so cool seeing Maya do this. And of course, she ends up drilling up through through the bottom of the train, through the cart, and then she ends up using the the hummingbird tongues camera, which Biscuits was calling it. And of course, she looks around, basically confirming that this is the cart that she needs to get into. And she ends up, of course, and once again, really cool shot here. I want to show this how she sees it. From her perspective, how she sees the camera. She has once again an app or something on her phone, and she's just looking around. Once again, beautiful editing, beautiful shot, really cool style, and really makes Echo look like a badass here. So it was really cool. So she pulls out the grinder, she starts cutting up into the train, and then of course she ends up making her way in. Once again, what a cool shot. Once again, I was just picturing a scene right from one of Tom Clancy's books, but especially Splinter Cell. Like, this is exactly how I see Splinter Cell starting a mission. He cuts his way in, comes up, and with the light shining, and I just thought that was really just really cool how they went with that, how they, with the choice of editing there of her coming up. I also really liked the little piece of editing that they did as well, where they decided to have Maya actually pull the thing off of her prosthetic leg rather than her. I just thought it was really appropriate because I feel like if she actually kept the clothing down over her prosthetic leg, that could actually interfere in a negative way, not a positive way. I feel like she would trip up in it or something. So just little, like I said, little details like that is really what made this episode so good. So she ends up going up to the box. She opens it up, but they don't ever reveal to us what she's doing and whatnot. But we do learn that she didn't steal anything because she says it to Biscuits after. But by the end of the episode, you will learn that she did put something in the box. You just don't know what it is right now at this point in time. But you will know by the end of the episode. And so she ends up getting out and getting back up on top of the train. And while she's running back, with once again a really cool shot with her running, especially with the prosthetic leg. The actor just does such a great job at her performance, especially considering this is her very first gig. But as she's running, her leg ends up getting caught between the carts, the railway carts, almost right where the carts are connected, which once again shows how her disability is a strength, but also it's a weakness. It's a strength because, if this had been her real leg, this would have caused some serious trouble, but it's not. It's a prosthetic, so in some degree, the prosthetic leg actually protected her here, but then it also becomes even more of a weakness because now even her prosthetic leg is actually damaged. So now it's almost like her disability has a disability. And so I just thought it was really interesting that they decided to do something like that because, it's just, I don't know. To me, even though it's not really her real leg, it still looked really painful. To me, it actually looks, to me, I feel like it actually had more emotion than what it would if it actually was her real leg, because now you can see what she struggles with a little bit more every day, or how she would struggle if she never had the prosthetic leg. And so she ends up having a vision, but this time she doesn't have a vision back to Chafa. She just has a vision back as far as Lowak, and of course this ends up giving her the glowy hands. And with the glowy hands, she now has enough strength to release her leg, and she's able to do so. And so she ends up running back to the end of the train. Of course, there's a few other, there's a little bit of a sequence there as well. She's trying to basically show Biscuits where she's to, whatnot. She uses like a big tool or something to throw in to the train wheels and whatnot to try to, I guess, to signal to Biscuits where she is and whatnot, just so that he can find her. And so he does find her, and then we get the scene from the trailer where she jumps off the top of the train and into the back of his truck. Even though technically she don't actually land in the truck, she does survive by holding on to the back of it. And then we get a hilarious scene here where she's in the back of the truck and Biscuits is like, you almost got killed, you almost died here, we all almost died here. And he's like, I hope whatever you stole was worth it. And this is when we learn that she didn't steal something, that she actually put something in the box because she said, who said anything about stealing? Or something like that, or she's like, I didn't steal anything, or whatever it was. So it's just, I guess Biscuits is really confused. Why would you go through all that and go through that entire sequence and not steal something? I guess because he doesn't really know what she's doing. So in the meantime, we see the train continue on, and it goes to New York, to what we eventually learn is actually one of Fisk's actual armory. So this is where he would keep his weapons, guns, and I believe they also show like he has rocket launchers, grenades, and basically his entire armory. And when they open up the crate that Maya had placed, it turns out that she had put a bomb in the crate that she hacked into or got into, and of course this causes extreme havoc, and she ends up destroying all of Fisk's armory. Really cool special effects here, really nice CGI, and I think it was shot in a way from a distance to help with the budget. I feel like because they didn't zoom in on it, and they were, they sort of have like this panorama shot, almost like this panned out shot. I feel like it makes it more realistic because they didn't have to be so detailed with the flames and with the fire and whatnot. But it's also really beautiful to see, the New York in the background. So it's very likely that this is probably somewhere in Hell's Kitchen, or somewhere down around the docks, which we learn in the Daredevil Netflix show. Fisk had a lot to do with the boats and the docks and whatnot, having stuff coming in and out all the time. And so that's very likely where this is, somewhere down around the docks. So in the meantime, after the explosion, we come back to Henry, and Henry gets a little nervous because he knows, that this is probably going to come back on him in some weird way, shape, or form. And we already know from episode one that Fisk, his the people that are after Fisk are, or not after Fisk, but the people that worked for Fisk are after Maya, and because she, in episode one she was shot, and so I'm thinking that Henry's probably knows that Fisk's people are going to figure out that this was Maya, and that it's probably going to fall back on him because it happened in his territory. As soon as the guy told Henry what the crate number was, then Henry knew right away. Oh boy, this is Maya, and he's like, I'm going to handle it. And he tells his co-workers here not to worry about it because he said if anything comes back, it'll blow back on him and not them. So basically saying that he'll protect them. And so in the meantime, Maya ends up going to Scully because I guess she knows that he's very hands-on. He's really good with fixing stuff and tinkering and whatnot. And she ends up giving him her prosthetic leg, and he ends up sort of fixing it to the point where he gives her like a temporary leg so that she can still get around. But that her permanent leg, the new permanent leg with a couple of upgrades that she wanted, won't be ready until a little while, maybe the next day or however long it takes him to build. So he only gives her a temporary leg. But I really like their interaction here. You can tell Scully really loves Maya. He really forgives her. Like, he's not mad or abrasive towards her, not like Chola is, her grandmother. And so, he actually says to her, it's really nice to see you. It's really nice to have you around the shop. It's been way too long. And so I really liked how he embraces her rather than sort of pushing her away, which is something I think that Chola should have done a little bit more. But either way, they have a really cool, connection here, really cool back and forth. And Maya, once she gets the new temporary leg, ends up noticing a bunch of the statues over there. And so Scully sort of explains some of the myths to her the best that he can. But he does tell Maya that, Chola is the one to ask. She has all the information about the lineage and about the ancestry. But he does tell her the story about Chafa and how she saved her people in the cave, which Maya seems to have somewhat of a little bit of knowledge about anyways. But Scully does tell her that she should go and ask these questions to her grandmother because her grandmother knows more about it than he does. But he does say something very interesting here. He does tell Maya that Chola was able to trace their ancestry back to Chafa, and that would explain why she's getting these sort of this supernatural power, and why she's having these visions of the different generations, such as Chafa and now Lowak in this episode. And so it's just a really cool back and forth. And now Maya knows that it comes from this lineage, and that she comes from the bloodline from Chafa, which would explain why it's only now she's getting these powers, because it's only now that she's actually sort of going back to her family, going back to her roots, and going back to Oklahoma. So it makes sense because I did see a couple of people online like sort of ask the question, well, why is it that she's only now getting her powers? Why didn't she have her powers before? And I think the most logical answer is that it's only now that she's coming back to her roots, and it's only now I think that she's even curious or trying to sort of figure things out a little bit, and to some degree maybe even repent a little bit. Right now she's still sort of on this hellbent mission to take over Fisk's position, but she is sort of growing as a character as well, because violence is all she's ever known. And so I do think that she's on at least not so much of being on the path to becoming a hero, but more so being on the path of becoming more of like a Punisher character, so more of like an anti-hero. I think that she'll be willing to do bad things to bad people as opposed to being straight up a hero. And so then we get to the very end of the episode when Henry confronts her. And once again, Henry is very realistic. He basically speaks the truth to her. He's like, hey, what do you think's going to happen? You're going to bring a war here to this town. And she's like, well, actually, the war is already here. And he's like, talking about the chaos and all this craziness. And she's like, I'm in control of everything. I am the chaos. I have the power to, of saying when it starts, when it ends. And she's like, I am in control. And then Henry basically says it like it is. He's like, hey, you sound a lot like Fisk and whatnot. And he's like, let's not forget that it's the people that love you who will be the ones who suffer the most. And that's true. Fisk, especially with someone like Fisk, he's not an idiot. He's not a fool. He knows, he knows how to hurt people. He does it. I mean, he literally hurt people for a living. That's how he's made his fortune. That's how he's got his power. And so everything Henry is saying here is absolutely true. And that's where episode 2 ends in Echo. So overall, I absolutely really enjoyed this episode. I've seen a couple of people were a little bit disappointed with the lack of action, but I actually thought it was enough action to keep me interested. I really thought that that mission with the train was done really cool. I really thought it was interesting to see Maya go on this really cool kind of tactical mission while also involving biscuits. I really liked the dynamic between her and Scully. You can really feel here in episode 2 that her and Scully are probably going to have a or be one of Scully will likely be one of the closer relationships that she has moving forward. Now I do think that she'll remain very close with Henry, but I think that Scully will be more of the hurt. I think Scully will be not so much someone who's fighting against her, but also not as someone who's going to be involved with the family business. I think Scully is, he's clean, he's legitimate, he's not a criminal, he's not a gangster, but he does have a lot of heart, and he's also someone that's not oppressing her or pushing her away, whereas Chola is. But at the same time, as this series goes on, you will see a lot of parallels between Chola and Maya, because, Chola sort of, keeps her distance and sort of keeps that space between her and Maya, but then Maya also does that to Bonnie as well. So you can really see the parallels between Maya and Chola, because Maya is, pushing Bonnie away just like Chola is pushing Maya away. But overall, I really love this episode. Absolutely had a blast watching this. Like I said, Echo is definitely one of my favorite new characters, post Endgame, everything that came out after, Endgame. And I'm not saying that I liked Echo more than something like Loki. I still think Loki is probably one of the better TV series that's ever come out so far. But I just mean that out of all the new characters that we haven't met until after Thanos, I do think that Echo is probably my favorite, and I do really like Maya, and I really love this being the first project in the Marvel Spotlight. So with that being said, folks, that's my review of episode 2 of Echo. So let me know in the comment section below if you've seen it, and if you'd like to tell me why or why not. If you like this video, click that subscribe button, and until the next one, take care.